Here's a strange fact about the fastest book in the New Testament. It never finishes a sentence. Mark moves quicker than Matthew, quicker than Luke, quicker than John. It has no birth story, no genealogy, no slow theological overture. Within 4 verses, a prophet is already shouting in the wilderness. Scene cuts to scene at a sprinter's pace for 16 chapters straight. And then, at the exact moment you'd expect the payoff, the risen Jesus, the reunion, the triumphant final word, the oldest copies we have just stop. Mid-thought, on a word that in the original Greek isn't even a proper way to end a sentence. The book that never slows down is the one book that never lands. That's not a scribal accident. That's the argument. Mark never names its author inside the text. The title comes from early church tradition, pointing to John Mark, a young companion in the book of Acts, whose mother's house in Jerusalem was a meeting place for believers. He travels with Paul and Barnabas, walks off the job partway through, causes a rift, and is later restored. Near the end of his life, Paul asks for him by name and calls him useful. The oldest tradition adds something more specific, that Mark worked closely with Peter, and that this gospel is largely Peter's eyewitness memory set down in writing. That would explain the texture. Peter shows up constantly, wrong here, blurting out the wrong thing, falling asleep, denying he ever knew the man. Nobody invents embarrassing details about their own hero. Those survive because they happened. Most scholars place the writing in the 60s, likely from Rome, for a community that had just watched Nero blame them for a fire they didn't start. When Mark stops to translate an Aramaic word or convert a widow's 2 small coins into Roman currency so the amount lands, those are the habits of someone writing for outsiders in a city where following Jesus had just become dangerous. That context matters ahead. A gospel written into that kind of fear was never going to be gentle. It was going to be urgent. That urgency has a fingerprint. In Greek, it's the word euthys, usually translated immediately, at once, or straightway. Mark uses it more than 40 times. The rest of the New Testament combined uses it a fraction as often. The Spirit immediately drives Jesus into the wilderness. He calls the fishermen, and immediately they drop their nets. He enters the synagogue, and immediately a man cries out. Read a few chapters straight through, and you start to feel out of breath along with the sentences. That's not sloppy writing. Mark is showing you a servant on a mission with no time to waste, because, in his own opening words, the time is fulfilled, and a kingdom is arriving. Everything after that first announcement moves with the weight of something that will not wait. But underneath the sprint, there's a craftsman working very deliberately. Watch what he does with 2 stories that, on the surface, have nothing to do with each other. A synagogue leader named Jairus begs Jesus to come save his dying daughter. Jesus sets out, and the clock is audibly ticking. Then, mid-errand, the narrative just stops. A woman who has been bleeding for 12 years reaches through the crowd to touch the edge of his cloak, hoping to go unnoticed. Jesus stops everything to find her, to look at her, to call her daughter. And while he lingers, word arrives that Jairus' girl has already died. He goes anyway and raises her. Notice what Mark built by braiding these together instead of telling them separately. The woman had suffered for 12 years. The girl was 12 years old. One had spent an entire lifetime unnoticed. The other was about to lose the only life she'd had. Jesus gives them the identical word, the identical attention, the identical power over what looked unfixable. This is a technique scholars call intercalation. One story opened, a second story dropped into the middle of it. Then the first story finished, now read differently because of what happened inside it. Mark does this on purpose, more than once across the book. He's telling you something with the architecture of his own writing, not just with his sentences. These two stories are one story. Keep that in mind, because Mark is about to do the same thing with an entire gospel's worth of confusion. For a book in such a hurry, Mark keeps doing something that looks like it's working against its own momentum. Jesus heals a man and orders him to say nothing. He silences demons before they can speak his name. He raises a child from death and tells the family to keep it quiet, which is almost impossible since the whole town knew the child had died. Scholars call this pattern the messianic secret, and the tension it creates is sharp. One group in this book identifies Jesus correctly, instantly, every time. The demons. They name him the Holy One of God without hesitation. Meanwhile, every human character spends the entire book confused. The crowds guess prophet. The religious leaders guess dangerous. His own family thinks he's lost his mind. Even his closest followers watch him calm a storm with a single sentence and ask each other, terrified, who this even is. Demons who know and won't stop talking. Humans who don't know and can't stop guessing. And a Messiah quietly telling everyone to lower their voices. Mark reinforces this with structure. The long middle section where Jesus works hardest to open his disciples' eyes is bracketed by two healings of blind men. One is healed in stages, blurry shapes first, then clarity. The other is healed instantly and immediately starts walking the road to Jerusalem behind Jesus. The men with functioning eyes in this story are the ones who can't see. Sight in Mark was never about eyes. It's about whether you're willing to follow him to a cross. The crowd wanted a conquering king, and if that title had spread unchecked, people would have heard the right word and meant entirely the wrong thing. So he holds it back until it can be attached to the one thing nobody expected the Messiah to do. Exactly halfway through the gospel, near a town called Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asks the question the whole book has been circling. Who do people say that I am? Then he sharpens it. But who do you say that I am? Peter, for once, gets it right. You are the Christ. And what does Jesus do with that moment of triumph? He immediately starts teaching them that the Son of Man must suffer, be rejected, be killed, and rise after 3 days. Peter can't hold both ideas at once. A suffering Messiah sounded like a contradiction to a first-century Jew, so he pulls Jesus aside to correct him. Jesus turns on him with some of the hardest words in any gospel. That Peter is thinking like a man, not like God. From here, the whole book tilts toward Jerusalem. 3 times Jesus predicts his death plainly. 3 times the disciples miss it entirely, arguing after the first, bickering over rank after the second, angling for the best seats after the third. He keeps saying death. They keep hearing glory. And in the middle of that failure, he hands them and you the sentence that unlocks everything. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. That is the kind of king this is.
Not the conqueror the crowd wanted, the servant who dies in the place of the people he came for. Quick word before we go on. If this kind of close reading is opening the text up for you, consider becoming a channel member. That support is what funds the research behind these studies and keeps them free for everyone who finds their way here. To those of you already supporting this, thank you. Back to the text. There's a word Mark plants at the very start of the book and picks back up at the very end, and most readers never connect the two. At the baptism, Mark says the heavens were torn open, not parted gently, not opened like a door torn. The Greek is skids, a violent verb for ripping cloth or splitting wood, the same root behind the English word schism. The sky doesn't ease open, it's ripped. And a voice from it names Jesus, the beloved Son. Now jump to the moment Jesus dies. Mark tells us the curtain of the temple, the barrier walling off the holiest place from everyone else, was torn in two, top to bottom. Same word, same violence. The same tear that opened the heavens at the beginning now opens the one wall standing between God and everyone outside it. And it happens from God's side, not ours. Standing in front of that cross is a Roman centurion, a man who has overseen more executions than he could count. Something about this one is different. The strength in that final cry, the darkness over the land. And he says the sentence no enemy soldier had any reason to say. Truly, this man was the Son of God. Look at what just happened. The demons knew and were silenced. The voice from heaven knew, but spoke to no human ear but Jesus' own. The disciples, who had every chance to say it first, never got there. The first human being in this gospel to name Jesus correctly is an outsider, standing not in front of a miracle, but in front of a corpse. You cannot see who this is until you see him on that cross. That's Mark's answer to the whole secret. Get there, and even a soldier can see clearly. Which brings the tear back around to where we started. The women arrive at the tomb to anoint a body. The stone is already moved. A young man in white tells them Jesus is risen, going ahead of them to Galilee, and that they're to go tell the disciples. And the women flee, trembling. And this is the actual final line in the oldest manuscripts. Say nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. In Greek, that closing phrase is ephobonto gar, literally, we're afraid because.
The sentence ends on the word gar, a conjunction, the kind of word that sets up a next clause, not the kind that closes a book. It's grammatically possible, but unusual enough that scholars have puzzled over it for centuries. Later scribes clearly felt the same discomfort. You can see it in the added endings that appear in later manuscripts, with different vocabulary and a softer landing. Most scholars across traditions now agree those verses were added, not written by Mark. Strip those additions away and sit with the honest question. Why would a book end on fear and silence? Because this was never really a book about the disciples. The demons knew and were silenced. The disciples were slow and afraid. The women ran and said nothing. Every single human being in this gospel falls short exactly where it counts. And then the book just stops, with the command still in the air, go and tell. The heavens tore open at the start. The curtain tore at the cross. And the tear doesn't stop there. It keeps moving, past the last page, until it reaches whoever is holding the book.
The women were told exactly what to do, and the last words about them are that they didn't do it. The instruction is still standing open, still waiting on someone to carry it. That's not a broken ending. It's Mark handing you the pen. You've watched the whole shape of it now, the sprint through Galilee, the secret kept until the cross could explain it, 2 tears framing the book, a soldier seeing what the insiders couldn't. And then the story sets you down in front of an empty tomb with a message in your hands and no one left in the narrative to deliver it. Maybe you know that particular kind of silence, the conversation you keep meaning to have and don't, the thing you actually believe but let pass by because saying it out loud would cost something. Mark isn't interested in shaming you for that. He just leaves you standing where the women stood, with the road to Galilee in front of you. And notice where the risen Jesus goes to meet his failed and frightened followers. Not a throne room, not the temple. Back to Galilee, the ordinary place, the fishing boats, the daily work, where all of it began. He doesn't wait for anyone to get brave first. He goes ahead and meets them there. The book ends on, because they were afraid. It was always going to take someone willing to finish that sentence differently. If this changed how you read Mark, say so in the comments. Even one line helps this reach someone who needs it. Subscribe so the next study finds you, and if you're able, consider joining as a member to help keep it free for everyone. Until next time.